Ambassador Serath of the Zanari shifted his sensory filaments and adjusted his position in the gravity-cushioned seat of the Galactic Council's flagship observation chamber. Today's meeting was supposed to be routine, a simple classification of a newly discovered sentient species. As the appointed first contact specialist, Serath had witnessed thousands of these presentations, all concluding the same way: catalog, classify, and move on. The holographic display illuminated, casting a soft blue light across the chamber and highlighting the unique forms of the delegates. Some flexed their appendages in anticipation, others clicked their mandibles in boredom, and a few entered meditative trances, expecting little more than a data entry. Species designation: human, announced the automated system. Planet of origin: Earth, third planet orbiting a standard G-type star. Serath observed, amused, as a few delegates failed to activate their translation modules. What possible value could a species without quantum technology or advanced energy manipulation hold? The first footage played, showing a human female jogging in what was identified as Central Park in New York City. Serath's third eye blinked in confusion. Are they being pursued by something? He thought, watching her run in what seemed a pointless, repetitive pattern. No, Ambassador, answered Dr. Vinus, the council's xenobiologist. According to our research, they do this for recreation. A wave of condescending chirps rolled through the chamber. Wasting vital energy for amusement? It was absurd to these cosmic elites. The footage progressed with more shocking scenes. Humans leaping from aircraft with only fabric to slow their fall, plunging into vast bodies of water, exposing themselves to extreme temperatures in both the blistering heat and freezing ice baths. Clearly, Serath said, speaking with the overconfidence of one who had never been challenged in 6 centuries, we're dealing with a species that lacks proper risk assessment skills. Their survival is simply a matter of luck, not adaptation. The High Counselor, a being of pure light encased within an intricate crystalline core, pulsed in agreement. Classification recommendation? Serath waved a primary appendage with laziness. Category 7B, primitive pre-spacefaring. Standard observation protocols should suffice. If they survive their own impulsiveness, they might eventually evolve. If not, they'll disappear like countless other species before them. As the delegates shuffled out, Serath added a final note to his report. Species exhibits impressive resistance to environmental stresses, but demonstrates poor decision-making skills. Recommendation: minimal contact until a basic instinct for self-preservation develops. Little did Serath know that this report would soon be considered the greatest misjudgment in Council history, and his name would become infamous, remembered as the one who underestimated humanity beyond all reason. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor, and humans were about to become its greatest punchline. The diplomatic cruiser, Celestial Mirage, struggled to maneuver through Earth's atmosphere, its advanced sensors faltering under conditions that seemed impossible. Chief Navigator Callow's tendrils trembled as they interfaced with the ship's quantum guidance system. Ambassador, this is impossible, Callow screeched. The atmospheric readings are disrupting our sensors. It's chaotic, primitive. Serath's filaments twitched in irritation. Maintain composure. Locate a landing zone, a remote place to avoid alarming the locals with our presence. The ship's AI eventually located a large, uninhabited area on the surface, a vast expanse where humans were scarce. The ship descended, but as it approached, the environmental alarms began to shriek in a cacophony of warning. Ambassador, Dr. Myril, the ship's medical officer, called out in a voice straining with panic, the temperature. It's registering nearly 130 degrees Fahrenheit, 54 Celsius. Our shielding isn't designed for this. Serath scoffed and waved his appendage dismissively. Another sensor malfunction. No sentient life could have evolved under such harsh conditions. The landing was smooth despite the atmospheric interference. As the dust settled, the delegation prepared to exit. They activated their personal environmental shields, standard for any primitive world they visited. But as the doors opened, the heat crashed into them, a tangible wall of blistering air. The shimmering landscape was a barren desert under a scorching sun. The temperature readouts were impossible to believe. By the core of stars, Dr. Myrle whispered, "We've landed in a disaster zone. We need to leave before." Before he could finish, they spotted an anomaly, a human figure strolling casually across the landscape. Serath's eyes widened as he tried to process what he was seeing. The figure was approaching them, not running, not seeking shelter, just walking. And she was holding a steaming container. Tess Carter, a park ranger with a penchant for adventure, had been enjoying her morning at Death Valley National Park when the alien craft touched down nearby. A seasoned guide, she'd seen her share of strange occurrences, but this was a first. Nevertheless, she stuck to protocol. Morning, she called cheerfully, raising her coffee mug in a friendly salute. "Welcome to Death Valley National Park. I assume you're here for the geology tour? It's not until noon, though. It really heats up by then." Serath's translator stuttered as he tried to comprehend her words. She didn't seem to be panicking. She wasn't even sweating. "You live here?" Serath managed, his voice modulator struggling to stay even. Tess laughed, a sound that seemed to dance on the heated wind. "Oh no, I just work here. We get a lot of tourists this time of year, though. Quite a few campers even. Some are doing this extreme fitness challenge. It's wild. Had to warn them twice about staying hydrated." Dr. Myrle's scanning devices were going haywire, unable to make sense of Tess's life signs. How? They kept repeating. The heat, the radiation, the dry conditions. How is she alive? Tess noticed their astonished stares and chuckled again. "Oh, it's not that bad. Just remember to keep hydrated, and you'll be fine." "Oh!" And fair warning, an ultramarathon is coming through this area later. It's a 50-mile race. You might want to move your ship out of the way. Serath stared aghast as the implications sank in. This wasn't a disaster zone. This was a popular tourist destination. Tess took another sip from her scalding mug, which her body apparently processed without issue. Humans, Serath realized with a cold, creeping dread, were far more formidable than he'd believed. And this was only the beginning. When Serath's report reached the council, it was a rushed, urgent update. Initial assessment of humans was premature. Reevaluation required. As the Galactic Assembly convened in emergency session, an air of dread filled the chamber. High Counselor Vex, radiant and flickering with unease, spoke up. "We must understand their limits, Ambassador Serath. You will oversee an intensive program to test their supposed environmental adaptations." The selection process was simple. Tess Carter was joined by Dr. Lucas Moreno, a polar researcher who had spent decades in sub-zero temperatures, and Marina Petro, a deep-sea diver who held records for exploring ocean trenches. In the testing facility aboard the flagship, with technology capable of simulating any hostile environment, the humans entered without a hint of hesitation. The first test was a heat endurance simulation, set at the maximum limit recorded for carbon-based life. They watched as Tess Carter stood amid blistering conditions, the temperature rising well past the safety threshold. She yawned and adjusted her sunglasses. "Feels like a summer day in Death Valley," she said. "Mind if I do some stretches while we wait? Might as well get comfortable." Dr. Myrle's equipment screeched as it failed to keep up with her vitals. The reality sank in for Serath and the assembled council. These humans weren't just resilient. They thrived where life should not exist. The world as the galactic elite knew it was about to change. The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with an unprecedented level of chatter. The normally stoic, highly disciplined delegates were in a state of near panic, exchanging nervous glances and frantically consulting data pads. Serath stood at the center, his appendages twitching with agitation as he struggled to maintain composure. The images of Tess Carter, Dr. Lucas Moreno, and Marina Petro surviving extremes that would have melted or frozen most known life forms were seared into his memory. High Counselor Vex, the crystalline being who projected an aura of pure energy, pulsed with frustration. Ambassador Serath, it is clear that we have vastly underestimated their adaptability. We need a new course of action. This is no ordinary primitive species. Serath lowered his appendages, a sign of reluctant agreement. "Agreed, High Counselor. We must reevaluate our entire approach to Earth and its inhabitants. Their capacity to endure conditions beyond reason suggests that we may have misunderstood their evolutionary trajectory. Vex shifted, light refracting within its crystalline structure as it considered the implications. It is not just their endurance that is alarming, Serath. If their survival extends to other environments, they may be capable of adapting to space travel sooner than anticipated. We must learn more, and quickly. A ripple of agreement surged through the council, though there was still palpable uncertainty. The assembly turned its collective attention to the holographic display at the center of the chamber, where live feeds from Earth were now being projected. The footage showed humans engaged in their unusual activities, climbing sheer rock faces without harnesses, swimming in freezing water with no protective suits, enduring unthinkable physical challenges as if they were playing a game. Dr. Myral's voice crackled in Serath's communicator, interrupting his reverie. Ambassador, I've been examining the metabolic data from our subjects. It's unprecedented. Their bodies seem to operate at a higher efficiency level, even in the harshest environments. I have never seen anything like it. Serath's sensors flared in a mixture of dread and intrigue. Prepare the next phase of testing, Dr. Myral. We need to know the limits of this resilience. What's the most hostile environment our simulations can replicate? There was a pause, and Serath could imagine Dr. Myral's eyes wide with both excitement and fear. The black hole simulation chamber. It's never been used for life form testing. We use it solely for engineering and data analysis. But if we want to know, it's our best option. Serath's appendages clenched. Do it. We will know what they are capable of, no matter the cost. The facility was abuzz with activity as technicians made final adjustments to the black hole simulation chamber. Unlike the other simulations, this chamber was a labyrinth of energy fields, reinforced panels, and pulsating lights. It was designed to replicate the unimaginable conditions near the event horizon of a black hole. Immense gravitational forces, intense radiation, and temperatures so high that even the toughest alloys melted into plasma. Tess Carter stood before the control panel, surrounded by the Council's elite and the assembled scientific experts. Her friends, Lucas Moreno and Marina Petro, were beside her, each looking more composed than Serath would have thought possible. "You sure you're okay with this?" Lucas asked, raising an eyebrow. He was no stranger to the harshest of environments, but this was different. The black hole chamber was designed to test the very fabric of reality, and none of them had any idea what it might do to them. Tess grinned, her confidence unwavering. "I've spent days in Death Valley, Lucas. A black hole might be a bit of a step up, but I think we'll manage." Marina nodded. "If we don't, well, at least we're not taking any risks we haven't faced before." Serath looked at the three humans, each displaying an odd mix of casual courage and resolute determination. If there was ever a test to determine if humanity was capable of survival beyond their homeworld, this was it. "Proceed," Serath commanded. The chamber hummed as energy fields coalesced, filling the space with an electric tension. The lights shifted from blue to a searing orange-red, and the air grew heavy with the sound of deep, rumbling waves. The temperature gauge climbed rapidly, and radiation levels spiked, detected by every device in the room. Tessa's eyes flickered with challenge as she stepped forward, pulling a thin towel from her pocket and wiping sweat from her brow. The heat was oppressive, and the intense pressure on her body should have been unbearable. But her heartbeat was steady, her breathing even. "Testing heat tolerance at 5,000 Kelvin, Dr. Myral announced, voice tense. Tess stretched her arms above her head, feeling the heat seep into her muscles and bones, but she didn't falter. Lucas was pacing, his eyes darting between the readouts and the human trio. Marina took a deep breath, releasing it in a long, even exhale, unfazed by the shifting environment around her. The radiation level surged to a point that would have made any known life form disintegrate, but instead of collapsing, the humans stood, alive and defiant. "Can you feel that?" Marina whispered, glancing at Lucas. "Like a challenge," he replied, eyes blazing with something between disbelief and exhilaration. Serath's sensors scanned Tessa's body, frantically trying to process the information. Her skin temperature had risen, yes, but it remained stable. Her metabolic rate had accelerated, but not at a lethal pace. Her body was adapting, not crumbling. "Remarkable," Dr. Myrtle whispered. The chamber continued to simulate the impossible, with gravity bending and twisting around them, but the humans stayed on their feet. They were testing not just their endurance, but their very existence. The entire council watched in stunned silence as Tess Carter, Lucas Moreno, and Marina Petro withstood what no other species had ever dared. They proved that they could survive in conditions that were meant to break them, reshaping Serath's understanding of what it meant to be human. When the simulation finally ended, the chamber quieted, leaving only the sound of heavy breathing and the thrum of cooling machinery. Tess, Lucas, and Marina exchanged looks of pure triumph, their expressions reflecting the fact that, to them, the impossible had become routine. Serath's mind raced with realization. This was no longer about a primitive species to be cataloged. Earth's inhabitants were a force that could not be underestimated. And while he had underestimated them before, he knew now that the galaxy would never make that mistake again. For the first time, Serath felt a flicker of doubt about what he had thought he knew. Humanity was different. They were not just survivors, they were thrivers. And that revelation had just changed everything. The days following the black hole simulation were a whirlwind of activity in the Galactic Council's flagship. Serath barely had time to process what had occurred before another emergency session was called. This time, it wasn't just the Council's elite who attended. Representatives from every known species in the galaxy were summoned. The implications of the humans' resilience were too significant to ignore. The Grand Chamber, a circular expanse of polished obsidian and shimmering data conduits, pulsed with the energy of 1,000 different beings, their voices layered in a chorus of confusion and awe. Holographic projections displayed the data gathered from the testing, and the Council's expert, Dr. Myrtle, stood at the center, eyes wide with exhaustion and excitement. "Ambassador Serath, I have never seen a result like this," Dr. Myrtle said, turning to the ambassador with a mixture of disbelief and reverence. "The readings from the simulation indicate that humans are capable of surviving in environments that should have atomized their cellular structures. The data confirms that they are not only resilient, they are adaptable to an unprecedented degree." Serath's appendages quivered in thought. He had been so certain that the humans were just another primitive species, no different from the thousands cataloged over the centuries. But now, the truth was staring him in the face. Earth was home to a race that defied all known biological principles. He glanced at the chamber's hollow display, which now showed images of human explorers scaling towering mountain ranges in sub-zero temperatures, diving into the crushing depths of the ocean, and even surviving in vacuums with only rudimentary equipment. And yet, Serath said aloud, addressing the chamber, "We have seen only the tip of the iceberg. What else could they endure? And what implications does this have for our continued interaction with them?" A murmur swept through the chamber as delegates exchanged theories and counter-theories. Ambassador Kale, a sleek, silver-skinned being from the star system Oris, raised one of his forehands. "We cannot simply catalog them as a curiosity anymore. If their survival capabilities continue to exceed our understanding, then they may become a power to be reckoned with." "Yes," replied Zerna, a sharp-minded historian of the Lurians, known for their cold, calculating approach. "But we must proceed carefully. Any species that can adapt so rapidly poses both a potential ally and a dangerous threat." The room fell silent as High Counselor Vex's crystalline form pulsed with an intense hue of blue. "What we need now is to understand their motivations," Vex said, voice echoing like wind chimes. "Why do they seek out such extreme conditions? What drives them to challenge themselves to the brink of death and beyond? If we can comprehend that, we can better predict how they will respond to us." The chamber resonated with agreement. Serath was about to make a decision that could change everything. "Dr. Myrtle, begin a new study. We need to understand their psychology, their reasons for putting themselves in such dangerous situations. Engage the humans who previously demonstrated their adaptability and ask them to participate in a series of controlled psychological evaluations. We will need to know the limits of their willingness to endure pain, risk, and sacrifice. Tess Carter, Lucas Moreno, and Marina Petro sat in a sterile observation room aboard the flagship, surrounded by strange, fluid-like screens displaying symbols and shifting colors. They had been brought here under the pretense of further testing, but the atmosphere was different this time, more serious, more probing. A panel of beings from various species watched them through a transparent wall, their eyes focused and unblinking. An alien named Sroon, who resembled an amalgamation of living stone and crystal, approached them. Its voice was deep, like gravel grinding against glass. "Humans," it intoned, "we need to understand your resilience. We have seen you withstand the worst the universe can throw at you, but we must now understand why. What drives you to seek these extremes?" Tess exchanged a glance with Lucas and Marina. She leaned forward, the air of someone who had faced life-or-death situations so often that it had become second nature. "To us it's simple. We do it because we can. Because pushing ourselves, seeing how far we can go, that's what makes us human. It's how we learn, how we grow." Lucas nodded, his usual calm demeanor unwavering. Survival isn't just about living. It's about thriving, finding out who we really are when everything is stripped away. That's when you discover what you're made of. Marina's eyes sparkled, a hint of mischief in her expression. "And if we survive, we know we can face anything. We've learned to adapt, to look at impossible situations and decide to challenge them. Maybe that's our gift, our curse, an unyielding will to push forward, no matter what." Sroon's crystalline eyes shifted as it processed their words. "You do not fear pain, nor death." Tess smiled, a little wistfully. "We fear stagnation. We fear living a life without growth. Fear itself isn't the absence of danger. It's the absence of purpose." A murmur of astonishment echoed through the observing delegates. High Counselor Vex's form glowed brighter, its crystalline facets refracting the chamber's light in hues of blue and violet. "Fascinating," Vex said. "It's not just the resilience, it's the mindset that drives them. That is what makes them exceptional." Serath, now seated with a calm expression, allowed himself a moment of reflection. Humans were not just surviving. They were defining themselves in the face of adversity. This realization turned the tide of his understanding. The galaxy had underestimated them, but that was about to change. Humanity was no longer just a species to be observed. They were now an enigma that had to be unraveled, understood, and respected. "The galaxy," Serath said to the chamber, his voice firm and resolute, "has witnessed something extraordinary. And now, we must decide what to do with that knowledge." The decision, Serath knew, could alter the course of interstellar relations forever. The council chamber was electric with speculation and fear. Delegates from the farthest reaches of the galaxy had gathered, their collective gaze fixed on Serath, who stood at the podium with a poise he'd never felt before. The truth was clear now. The humans were no ordinary species. The results from the trials aboard the flagship were in, and what had started as an investigation into their physiological limits had turned into an exposé of their psyche, their courage, and an unquenchable thirst for growth. The implications were staggering. High Counselor Vex's crystalline form pulsed with a mix of deep blue and green, indicating a rare state of deep contemplation. "Ambassador Serath, it has been proposed that humanity is no threat, that their resilience is simply a matter of biological fortitude and not some sign of potential power. Do you now think otherwise?" Serath's primary appendages rippled as he met the High Counselor's gaze. "I have come to believe that the answer is more complex than we first thought. They have faced death and embraced it willingly, only to return changed. They are not just surviving. They are evolving, as if danger is their greatest teacher." The chamber hummed with tension. It was an extraordinary revelation. The humans didn't just adapt to hardship, they learned from it. They sought it out as though it were nourishment for their very soul. And if that was true, then they were not just a species that had withstood the harshest conditions the galaxy had seen. They were a species that could turn survival into an art, a means of pushing the boundaries of what life could endure. A delegate from the Serath system, whose elongated, metallic form hummed with an eerie, mechanical resonance, stood up. Ambassador, if you are correct, what does this mean for us? If their resilience is not a fluke, but a drive, then they could become powerful allies or a dangerous adversary. Yes, Serath admitted, the weight of his words falling like lead on the chamber's silence. It is time we reassess our stance toward them. Humans are not just capable of surviving. They are capable of learning, adapting, and most importantly, they are driven to thrive against all odds. That, my friends, is the most formidable force in the universe. A soft murmur of agreement followed. There was no denying it. Humans were no longer just a curiosity. They were a force that needed to be reckoned with. Serath's thoughts flitted back to the first moment he had witnessed a human surviving in extreme heat. That was not just survival. That was defiance. The room grew restless, delegates murmuring and shifting in their seats. A sudden burst of light shot through the chamber, and the holographic display flared to life. The projection showed an image of Earth from space, a swirl of blues and greens cradled by the blackness of space. And so we ask, High Counselor Vex said, voice deepening, should we treat them as potential partners or as a challenge to our supremacy? Are we prepared for what comes next? Before Serath could respond, a voice cut through the chamber, clear and sharp. It was the voice of a human representative, Sarah Carter, who had accompanied the research team from Earth. She had been silent until now, content to observe, her presence among the delegates like an enigma they had yet to solve. I think you've answered that question already, Sarah said, standing up from her seat. We're not here to be your challenge, and we're not here to be your partners either. We're here because we survived. We will keep surviving. And if you choose to stand in our way, you'll find that we'll survive that too. The silence that followed her words was deafening. It wasn't just the shock of her defiance that caused it, but the recognition of the truth she carried. The humans were not like the thousands of other species in the galaxy. They did not bow to power, nor did they submit to fear. They were an anomaly, unpredictable, relentless, and resolute. A low hum of agreement spread through the chamber. Even the most stoic and calculating delegates couldn't hide the flicker of respect in their eyes. High Counselor Vex looked at Serath, and for the first time, the crystalline being seemed almost curious. What do you propose, Ambassador? Serath took a deep breath and allowed a small, determined smile to touch his lips. I propose we approach Earth with respect, not fear. We extend our hand, not as a conqueror, but as a peer. For if we are to coexist, it is not in rivalry that we must engage, but in mutual growth. Vex's crystalline form shifted, and a deep green hue washed over it, signaling approval. The chamber stirred, and whispers of support passed from one delegate to the next. Serath knew the road ahead would not be simple. There would be factions who would call for restraint, others who would argue for caution. But one thing was certain. Humanity had redefined its place in the galaxy. No longer would they be overlooked, underestimated, or ignored. They had proven themselves, and the galaxy would have to accept that. The age of humanity had begun, not with fear, but with survival, something the stars themselves would never forget. The chamber's lights dimmed, and the echoes of newfound respect resounded in the silence that followed. The story of how humans were first discovered would be told, not as a cautionary tale of an unremarkable species, but as the moment the galaxy realized they were the one thing they couldn't predict or control. And somewhere on Earth, Sarah Carter was already making a new cup of coffee, preparing for whatever came next. The human race was ready, come what may.